Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Turn of the Tassel Show. My name is Stephen Ampersand. I am your host, and as always, I'm here to help you and the people you love get to and through college, university, or the trade school earlier on time with minimum to no debt. And that's something we celebrate around here because we're upwards of $1.75 trillion and counting of student loan debt, and it's not going away. It's not going anywhere, and I can tell you that definitively because even as we are continuing to have student loan interest and payment pause through August of 2022, we're not. It's not moving. It's sitting there, right? So folks aren't actively being required to pay right now. Although, if you've looked at some of our previous content in prior episodes, you know that I've encouraged people to take advantage of this time where they're not required to make payments and where interest is not accruing, and use this time right here, right now, to be paying down your student loan debt, because chances are there won't be another time or another opportunity like this where the rates won't be rolling against you, where the interest won't be compounding against you. And so compound interest is a miraculous, wonderful thing if you're on the right side of it. But if you are on the wrong side of it, you never quite get out of it. I mean, I did a broadcast yesterday where we looked at a single mom of color who took out almost $200,000 worth of student loans and Parent Plus loans. I call them Parent Plus loans because really people who jump both feet in on those are doing so because they're giving in to their whimsical feelings and emotions about their kid going to their dream school, or not wanting their kid to struggle the way they did, and so they think this is a way, and yet in the end the kid ends up struggling because they're borrowing loans, and then you end up struggling because you're borrowing even more loans, and you're doing so at a time in your life where literally you're trying to prepare for retirement. And how does that make sense? It doesn't. It makes zero sense. By the time I think at one point we talked about how literally you spend more time paying off the student loan than you did raising the child. That makes no sense, right? So we talk about that. So today we're going to look at this idea of indentured servitude. And for my history buffs out there who know what this is, oftentimes when you hear about indentured servitude, it's sort of rolled out there alongside the conversation of chattel slavery, right? Because, folks who are descended from the slave trade, et cetera, and ultimately were in chattel slavery, talk about that experience, which was a horrible experience. And sometimes the counterpoint, although I don't want to get into debating this, but sometimes the counterpoint on that is that, well, there were indentured servants, and these were mostly Europeans, and they were coming and they were like slaves too, right? So you sort of get that, well, okay, you guys had that, but we had this, right? Not the point of this comparison, not the reason why we're bringing that up. That's another topic for another content creator. I don't deal with that kind of stuff. Okay. Others can have that conversation. But what I want to talk about is the reality of indentured servitude and what it actually was, and look at that in comparison to what we're seeing today with the student loan program. And you could say that in many respects, this is happening with other, let's call it segments of our economy as well. There are other parts of our economy, other sectors, both private and public, that have systems in place that essentially put people in a position of indentured servitude, right? And I'm not going to dive into that, but just, do your own research and you'll see that there are lots of things out there that are designed to get people into debt and get them in a situation where they cannot get out of it, right? You could even argue that, the same thing was happening with sharecropping. And it's a very strong argument. Chattel slavery ended. And they said, well, you can stay here and work this land, and we'll let you rent the land that you're working, and we'll pay you to work it. But then you got to rent the land from us. And the way the rent and pay structure was set up, you didn't make enough money in earnings to be able to afford the rent. So you were a de facto slave again. So we're going to look at that today. So what I'm going to do is let's start with the definition of indentured servitude, and then from there we can, sort of delve into this story. And it's a new story, so we'll look at it. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and cut, as always, to camera number 2. Okay, pop up here. All right, there we go. Okay, so let's see here. We have, this is from Merriam-Webster's Dictionary, and indentured servant is a noun, okay? Definition of an indentured servant: a person who signs and is bound by indentures to work for another for a specified time, especially in return for payment of travel expenses and maintenance. All right, let me just say this. I can hear my 7th grade English teacher, Mrs. Platt, telling me, let me cut back to, I need to come all the way in for this. Mrs. Platt, who was fantastic, by the way, used to say, you can't define a term or a word with the word. So Webster's, I gotta tell you, this is a fail. All right, this is a fail. You failed because you had one job. Your one job was to define indentured servant for those of us who don't know, and not use terms like indentures in your definition. So I'm gonna see if I can find another definition, because that was whack. All right, let's try this one. All right, let's go back to camera number 2. All right, this is an article. Indentured servitude refers to a contract between two individuals in which one person worked not for money, but to repay an indenture, here we go again, or loan. All right. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay. Or loan within a set time period. Indentured servitude was popular in the United States in the 1600s as individuals, mainly European immigrants, worked in exchange for the price of passage to America. All right. Okay. So again, important to have this definition on straight, because you can already begin to see the parallels, right? You can see the parallel between someone working for free to pay back a loan, usually a loan in this case, to get to America, right? To live the American dream. Often I've talked about how the American dream has increasingly become the American nightmare because of programs like the Federal Direct Student Loan Program. Okay. So here you go. Same idea. These European immigrants wanted to come here, but didn't have the money to get here. So they signed their lives over to be indentured servants to people that were already over here, that had property and had estates and had businesses and had plantations. And they would come, and for a set period of time, they wouldn't get paid. They would just work until that time frame was up, and then they could go be free, etc. Okay. So you can see the parallel to the student loan program, right? You've got people now trying to live the American dream, right? They're trying to get to the middle class or upper middle class, maybe perhaps starting as low as extreme poverty to working blue collar to middle class. They're trying to move up, but they don't have the money to do it. And so in lieu of having the money to do it, they are indenturing themselves to the federal government. The government is literally loaning them money to go to college. The colleges are setting their own prices with no limits, right? There's no limit. And de facto, they are, colluding with one another de facto anti-trusting with one another legally, albeit, let me just qualify that, sweeping generalization. Legally, right? Meaning we're going to look at what they charge over there, we're going to look at what they charge over there, and we're going to make sure we're somewhere in the middle or close so that we're all pretty much in the same area. So even though we're all raising our rates, we're all raising them at the same time. So people just assume, well, this just must be what it costs to go to college. Meanwhile, they're getting their eyes gouged out with loan money that they can never repay. Okay, so indentured servants. So set period of time, 10 years, 20 years, I think 22-year graduated, something like that. They got all these different loan terms, right? And similar to indentured servants, similar to sharecroppers, it's probably more comparable to the sharecroppers. The amount of interest that's accruing and the principal that they're paying, they're borrowing, with the earning potential and or parent plus nightmarish potential of not having the means ultimately to pay it back means they stay in a perpetual state of indentured servitude. They can't get out because they don't ever make enough money to keep up with the interest rates, etc. And the balances are so high, by the time they get finished, if ever, which for most folks it's not ever, they're turning right around to borrow for their children. It's no bueno. So I want to look at this video here. We're going to unpack it a little bit. This is if I can get back there, let me go back to the very beginning here. We want to look at this is Rising. Let me see if I can get rid of this. Let me go back here. Bear with me as I pull this up, because we are trying to pull up the video. Let's get rid of this. And actually, I think I'm going to need to, hang on a second here. I think I'm going to need to connect via Bluetooth so you can hear this. Let me see if I can do this. All right. All right. Let's see. We're going to go ahead and cut to camera 2. Let's see if this worked. All right. We can see it. Can we hear it? Can we make it larger? Doesn't look like we can. So we're going to see if we can hear it. And we're going to try to make it larger. Not hearing it. We'll figure this out. Hang on a second here. Let me go back.
David, is this next?
There we go. All right, let's start from the beginning. We're building and sailing the boat at the same time here. So let's see if we can drag this back. Okay, and
that means roughly 42 million federal borrowers will have been able to skip payments for 22 months. So is canceling student debt entirely next? Executive editor of the American Prospect, David Dayen, joins us now to discuss. Well, inquiring minds want to know. David,
fair use.
Is this next?
Fair use.
I mean, it remains to be seen, but
certainly
the argument
for this
made on the side of people who want to see cancellation has been strengthened by the fact that we're doing this payment pause and have been doing it for close to 2 years. And it's the exact same part of the federal statute that allows you to do that, also would allow you to cancel the loans. So, I mean, people certainly can compartmentalize, but there's effectively no difference between asserting the authority under the Higher Education Act to pause payments and asserting that same authority to cancel a portion of the debt. So certainly that I expect is an argument that will be made by the people who want to see cancellation.
David, let me ask you, is this something, so say we go the route of cancellation, do you foresee it as something that's sort of a one-time stopgap following the pandemic and the economic downturn that came with it? Are we looking at something more sustaining and long-term for future loans that are taken out?
Well, I think it has to be a prelude to a complete overhaul of how we think about financing higher education in this country. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, we sort of are getting a preview of a life without student loans, and it's a very underrated part of the economic recovery. At this point, by my calculations, something like $360 billion has been, temporarily forgiven here in terms of monthly payments. And that has created a lot more economic stability among the 42 million people who have student loans. It's created increased economic activity. And it will create more equitability. There was a great piece in the Wall Street Journal last week showing that the racial equity gap has increased largely because of student debt. Black households with people in their 30s who have college education have not budged in terms of personal wealth relative to white households that are similarly situated. And a lot of this is because of the debt that they have to incur and then service. So I think that you can't just do a one-time. cancellation and wipe your hands of it. It has to be paired with something, I mean, similar to what Biden has been talking about in his Build Back Better agenda, which is free tuition for community colleges is where he goes, but I think you could expand that even more, and just some other way to finance this, because it's too much of a burden on young people. They leave college with a mortgage essentially, and it really weighs down economic activity at the beginning of people's working lives.
You know, and David, when you move the conversation from pause to cancellation, you start getting wrapped up in all of this class warfare, and you start to get people panicking about, oh well, you know, you're going to cancel the student debt of the rich kid that went to Harvard and doesn't need it. Yet you don't get any of that with the pause. Like there's not a peep. Nobody complaining about the differential impact and unfairness of a universal pause, and a cancellation would at $50,000 or at $10,000 would actually be significantly worse, you know, for the country than this universal pause that we have going on. You know, should the left start talking about a 10-year, 20-year, 30-year pause just to get people to calm down in their rhetoric around this?
Well, I mean, I think what it shows is that cancellation would be a one-day story. You know, maybe you heard rumblings at the beginnings of the pause about well, this is.
I don't know. I think that there's probably less of a freak out when it comes to pausing interest. You know, people I think can sort of say, well, okay, you're not gonna be charged interest, but you still have to pay back what you took out. So I don't know if it would cause. I do agree with Ryan in that this isn't causing that freak out, and I think potentially the optics of a handout. Now, I'm all in favor of forgiving student loan debt. I think it's absolutely in the best interest of the country and economic growth. And on top of that, expanding free college for all state schools, 4-year degrees and beyond, even if it's a state school for sure. But just I think that would be absolutely beneficial for the.
Audio went out there. Sorry about that. But people would get behind it. People would get behind it if they knew that there wasn't going to be an opportunity for us as a country to ever get into that kind of student loan debt again by putting these measures in place. Right? But until that happens, until people are willing to actually do that, we're really just pitching around on the corners of the plate here. We're not really throwing one down the middle to really truly address it. So, what do we do in the meantime? Well, prevention, how's it go? An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. I mean, clap that up. Don't get in the debt in the first place. Contact us at 484-574-1866. Text me, I need a plan. Email us at turningtassel@gmail.com. Same subject line, need a plan. We will sit with you with a free consultation of 25 minutes to help you see what you can do to avoid this kind of debt and give you direction so that you don't end up in this conversation hoping that somebody's going to come in and wipe it away. Because really you can't. I'm Stephen Ampersand, and this is the Turning Tassel Show.